Well, good afternoon. Today we're looking at Psalm chapter 46. It has a popular verse in it. Many are familiar with it. In verse number 10, the psalmist says, "Be still and know that I am God." So let's look at the context of Psalm chapter 46 and see what that really means. He begins by saying that God is our refuge and strength. And an important thing is he's a very present help in trouble. Now, the trouble that he begins to speak about is very turbulent. There's chaos in the world, there are restless spirits, and it looks like everything is collapsing around them. And maybe you're going through something like that. It seems like everything is just going wrong, one thing after another, and it looks like it's overwhelming. This is how the trouble is described in this particular psalm. Notice in verse 2, because God is our refuge and our strength, and that's very important, isn't it? We shall not fear. Now, keep in mind, again, the challenges here because everything seems to be in a downward spiral. And nevertheless, we will not fear because God is our stronghold and our refuge. But again, he says, though the earth be removed and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, you can see just how large the problems are, how huge when you begin to think about mountains even being moved into the sea. Of course, this is metaphorical. That is, there are just really, really big troubles going on. Though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Again, I just want to emphasize we're not talking about some little issues that we get upset about, but we're talking about some real adversity and trouble in your life. Now, I'm not going to mention something here. I'm going to mention it in a moment, though, but I want you not to lose sight of when David puts that word Selah there, because I want to go back to that because he's going to say it twice. But down in verse number 6, again, notice here how turbulent and how much chaos is going on. And boy, isn't that happening today, even in our own country. The heathen raged and the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, that is God, and the earth melted. And then down in verse number 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And then he says again, Selah. Now, the idea there is to pause, but it's not just to pause like you do in a line of music. The idea of pausing here is you stop and you think over what has just been said. In other words, you ponder about and you meditate on these words. And I know that we don't live in a world that takes a lot of time to contemplate things. And we're so busy. We go to work, and then when we're at home, we either have the television on or we're on our cell phones. I mean, we seldom take some real time to think about things. And that's why a whole lot of folks get in trouble, because they act before they think. But what David wants us to do here is to ponder on these words so that we embrace them and give them some very deep thought. We need to be thinking over what these words mean and how they apply to our life. And so that's why he has these pauses sometimes, even in the middle of a short prayer like this. Now, notice in verse 10, that's the thing that we often think about. In fact, some of our songs have these words in them. Be still and know that I am God. Now, of course, in the context, you can actually go two ways with this. And the most popular way to go with it is be still, in the sense of quiet your soul, quiet your heart, be at rest in this restless world, that you have the security and the protection of God. And though the world is turbulent and all this chaos and restlessness is going on, just remember who God is and have a quiet, calm spirit. And that would be true, wouldn't it? But if you notice the previous verse before he talks about this, when the heathens are raging raging and there's all that trouble going on and the kingdoms are moving. Perhaps there's war and there's violence and all of that. He says when he uttered his voice, the earth melted. Now there's a serious note there because it could be understood, that is to be still and know that I am God. It could be understood in this previous verse that he's telling people to stop arguing with God, stop opposing God, surrender your will to God because he is sovereign over the whole earth and he has power as is being described here in this psalm. So when he talks about being still, I think we can take two things away from that. Number one is no matter what's going on in your life, put your hope and trust in God because he's in control. Let God quiet your soul, and you have to contemplate on that. That has to be more than just words. But on the other hand, there's also a note, I think, here where he's speaking to those who are opposing themselves and who are antagonistic against God, that you ought to be still and surrender because God will handle things. And there seems to be a rebuke there in verse number 6 about those who are opposing God. So those are two good thoughts about being still and thinking about some things. I mean, if you're going through some things, just remember who God is. And if you're standing against God, don't think the coast is clear. I mean, God's going to deal with some things. And so it's an important psalm, and it's a lot of food for thought. And I hope you'll take some time to think it over as we keep on going through the Psalms. And we'll be at Psalm chapter, wow, man, we're already in Psalm chapter 47 on Monday. So I'll see you then.